Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And Tim, thank you so much for that warm welcome and the words you said, which I appreciate but definitely don't deserve. It's such an honor to be with you here this morning, and I want to thank Tim and Gavin and Ashley for the invitation. It was tough getting up so early. Us pensioners, I mean, normally we sleep in a little bit, and but it hasn't been a sacrifice. And the fact that you're still having me here, that I regard it as such a privilege, Gavin, because I was on run out for about a year, and then yesterday completely discontinued. So I'm now a discontinued model, and despite that, you still saw fit to invite me to this breakfast. And it's always a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to talk about the motor industry, because it is such a dynamic and such a fascinating industry. I thought about it the other day. If I had to, perhaps 38 years ago, say, for example, I chose to go and work in the fertilizer industry, it would have been completely different, because the motor industry just engages one because it's a multifaceted industry, a global industry, an extremely competitive industry, and always new things happening. And later on, when Gavin and Ashley do their presentations, they will amplify just the dynamic nature of the motor industry. And I want to really thank KPMG, and Tim, you said it, this has become a highlight on the annual motor industry calendar, and thank you for sharing the results of your survey with us. And the results always certainly broaden my perspective and deepen my insight, and all the motor industry stakeholders who are here today will benefit from your research and the analysis that you have done. So I think KPMG deserves a warm applause. You're certainly a leader in terms of motor industry research, and I was so pleased when Gavin agreed to keep me on the distribution list. I provided him with my private postal address, so I will continue to learn, Gavin, from the research that you do. So Gavin asked me just to touch on two things very briefly, to just give my view of what is happening in the domestic market at present, and then secondly, to talk about prerequisites for sustainable success in the South African motor industry. So what is happening in the domestic market? And I just said to Tony and Marlene that I'm so relieved that our very intelligent people from the media aren't going to ask me for explanations in future as to why, for example, the market is so strong, because I've run out of scientific explanations. Because should one just look at the year-to-date picture, year-to-date total vehicle sales up 22%, total car sales even stronger, up 26%, and it's difficult to give plausible explanations as to why the new vehicle market rebounded so quickly and so dramatically. Let's not forget, in 2006, the market was 714,000. In 2009, 395,000. Last year, 493. And our forecast, or my forecast, was a total market this year, AMH included, of 550,000, 11.6% up. But should the momentum be maintained, then 575 100,000 could be a reality. There are many explanations. Certainly in the retail sector, we see very strong signs of meaningful replacement demand. It's also clear that the banks are starting to become a little more generous. Vehicle affordability is another key driver. And then lastly, the growth in the entry-level segment has been astounding. At the expense, let me add, of the used car market. January and February, if one had to put those 2 months together and look at the entry-level segment compared to the corresponding period last year, that entry-level segment has grown by 80%. So February, last month, was the third best ever February on record. And I was reminded by Stuart and Roger that we shouldn't, or certainly, component manufacturers aren't really celebrating this significant growth in the market because the composition of the market has changed in favor of fully imported vehicles. Passenger car market, 70% fully imported. But having said that, and Stuart, you admitted to it, there's bad news and there's also good news. So on the export side, things are going substantially better. It is likely that local manufacturers this year will produce close to 600,000 vehicles, and 300,000 are destined for export. So it should be, by all accounts, or should those forecasts materialize, an all-time record year in terms of new vehicle exports. And I believe NARCAM's numbers, that you believe component exports in value terms will increase this year by about 15%, and you hope to create another 4,000 jobs. So that is very encouraging. So certainly domestic demand a lot stronger than what we thought. Global demand also recovered much quicker than what was anticipated. Fairly favorable, or quite a favorable picture. I'm an ex-dealer, so let me just make one comment about what is happening to franchise dealers. Yes, franchise dealers are benefiting from the significant increase in new vehicle volumes. However, margins are still very, very tight. And the typical business model of a franchise dealer is reliant on after-sales profitability. And what we have seen, a nice uptick in new, a flat used car market, and for the first time in many, many years, a decline in after-sales revenue. So overall dealer profitability is showing an improvement, but not a significant improvement. Two last comments about the local situation, and Gavin is going to talk about it a lot more. In the past, if one had to look at the new vehicle market, it used to be a two-horse race, primarily, between Toyota and Volkswagen. And it has now become a three-horse race. You look at the numbers, we have some representatives from Associated Motor Holdings present here today. It is quite a revelation to study the growth of fully imported vehicles and the vehicles that AMH is importing in particular. So some months, number one, last year in the passenger vehicle market, but now almost every month in a strong number two position. And very soon, it could become a five-horse race, because some of the other major manufacturers have don't write off the likes of Ford and GM, Nissan. They have very ambitious growth targets. So the last comment I want to make about the local automotive industry is it's going to become even more competitive. Our new vehicle market represents 0.8% of the global automobile market, less than 1%, but despite that we have just on 60 different makes and about 1,800 or 1,900 different models. It's been said before, and I want to just repeat it. It's definitely one of the most competitive markets in the world. And we can just see the war amongst the established manufacturers and the independent importers intensifying. Let me then conclude with the second half of my presentation by just sharing with you my views regarding the future of the South African motor industry and what I regard as prerequisites for sustainable success. Because the motor industry is a key industry, contribution to GDP about 6.7%. We employ over 300,000 people. So in line with government's economic policies and government's key objectives, particularly in terms of job creation, what should the motor industry, or what should happen for the motor industry to continue playing a meaningful role and to perhaps increase its importance in relative terms? So what will determine our success? The starting point would be a stable political and social environment. Because in a developing country, the alphabet works differently, where P comes before E. So if we can't sort out the politics and have social stability, it's unlikely that we will have strong economic growth. In fact, it will be impossible. So I think we are doing reasonably well in terms of political stability and social stability. We need more meaningful economic growth. And once again, I'm just adding my voice to the voice of many, many, many other commentators. So hopefully this year we will see growth in excess of 3%. But for the motor industry to really experience significant growth in the domestic market, we would need GDP growth in excess of 4, 5, and let's dream about it. Should one just look at the situation in China, where they experience 7, 8, 9, 11% growth. Their market grew from 2003, just over 5 million vehicles to 18.6 million new vehicles last year. So it shows what an increase in disposable income can do and sustained economic growth. We need a stable currency. The one distinction that the rand has, it's the undisputed world champion of currency volatility. So somehow we need a more stable currency. The fourth factor that I want to touch on is we need a common vision. A common vision between government and the vehicle manufacturers and component manufacturers and labor. A so-called golden triangle, working in concert towards the attainment of the same objectives. And in my view, some common objectives, a unifying vision has developed. We need a favorable regulatory environment, and there are people in this audience who are far more knowledgeable than what I am about the APDP and the various investment allowances and all the components of the APDP, but once again, we have nothing to complain about. Although perhaps if we look at what is happening to labor legislation, that could be a negative. Our infrastructure has to cope, or has to have the capacity to cope with future growth. So in some cases, there are some obvious bottlenecks, be it road or rail. Our port, some of our infrastructure needs to be developed in quite an aggressive manner. Otherwise, the motor industry, should it start growing, will undoubtedly run into quite a lot of problems. All the local manufacturers will continue to face the challenge of improved productivity. Because although massive strides have been made, in some cases, compared to, in particular, other developing countries, we are still not as competitive, as productive as what we should be. So some work has to be done. A key that will unlock the future market is definitely enhanced affordability. We operate in a very price-sensitive market. We saw it in 2006 when, in real terms, vehicle affordability was enhanced by 6 to 7%, and we experienced sales growth in excess of 20%. We also see it in the market today, as I referred to earlier. Entry-level cars, well-priced, and how that is driving market growth. The motor industry would have to continue putting a lot of emphasis on sustainability issues, and I know that Gavin will touch on it in his presentation. So sustainability, in the broader sense, comprises a number of elements. Quality governance. Go to KPMG for some advice. More progress in terms of transformation. Bigger investment in social upliftment. And obviously, we need to protect our environment. If we want to grow the motor industry, increase sales, we have to keep pace with never-ending changes in the demographic and psychographic profiles of our customers. Certainly, if I think back over the past 38 years, the customers I had at Toyota and the customers I said goodbye to yesterday at McCarthy, in terms of profile and behavior, we are operating in a new world. And we have to align our structures and make sure that we deliver fulfillment to those customers. Another critical success factor will be quality partnerships, and Stuart Jennings and I had a brief chat about it. Quality partnerships between OEMs and component manufacturers. Quality partnerships between OEMs and franchise dealers, as an example. Because in some cases, those relationships tend to be very one-sided. And viability considerations, when it comes to the other party, aren't always regarded in an important light. Second last prerequisite for sustainable success, all the motor industry players need to make or deliver to their shareholders acceptable returns. Just to single out the OEMs, I did a little sum. I went through Mr. Norman Lambrecht's quarterly NAMSA reports. And since 2000, the OEMs have invested 32 billion rand in local facilities, new models, plant and equipment, 32 billion rand. They will only continue to invest, provided their shareholders get a decent return. And the same argument applies to component manufacturers, to parts distributors, to dealers. We need to get a return. We can't pursue profitless growth. It will undermine sustainability. And in some cases, because of the margin squeeze, we are seeing profitless growth. And that's not the correct recipe. Lastly, without effective leadership, the industry won't continue to grow. That is the key. Effective leadership is at the very core of competitive advantage and of sustainable success. So let me conclude by perhaps just saying this, that I think the quality of leadership in the South African motor industry is very, very good. The leaders in the motor industry, and I'm talking about all sectors, have displayed a lot of courage, have been bold, have demonstrated their resilience and their creativity, in particular over the past 3-4 years when things became exceedingly tough. As motor industry stakeholders, we sometimes sell ourselves short. In my opinion, in the industrial sector of South Africa, the local motor industry is the shining light. It's a star. It's become a respected member of the global automotive industry. And we should celebrate that achievement. The challenges are many, and the critical success factors I mentioned sort of amplified that statement. We are facing multifaceted challenges. But I certainly have confidence that there's a reasonable probability that we will meet those challenges head on, that the environment in South Africa will continue to be conducive to a motor industry that will do well, serve all its various stakeholders. So my very best wishes accompany all of you as motor industry stakeholders into the future. Thank you.